Hey everyone, welcome to Hrpc session. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes, so hang tight. Great. So it sounds like we are all ready to go. Just want to confirm that. Wonderful. So Aubrey, I know you're there. I'll go ahead and run through our welcome slides. The highlights of the agenda are we're going to hear a talk from Kim Creighton, followed by our work items. So at the moment, that's draft association. Niels is here. He's going to help me with that. And Gershabad, who may or may not be in the call. If not, we'll probably just all take a look at the doc ourselves and see if there's anything we can glean from that. He may just be a little late, which is fine. So yeah, you've been here before. Thank you all for coming to Hrpc. We want to make sure that you've seen the note well, and I'm not entirely confident that my slides are showing up properly. But since this is one of the first, it is actually maybe the first slot of IETF 109, it's really important that you understand what's in the note well as far as intellectual property rights go, and also privacy and code of conduct issues. So you can also find these anywhere on the IETF site. So the Human Rights Protocol Considerations Research Group is part of the Internet Research Task Force. So we're looking at long-term research issues. We're very much curious about and exploring the ways in which the human rights framework might intersect, both impact and be impacted by Internet protocols and their standardization. So we're not developing standards, but we are conducting research that is relevant to standards development. We were chartered to look at, again, how protocols can strengthen and threaten human rights. And you can check out more on hrpc.io. So we have some objectives. We want to look at the relationship between Internet protocols and human rights. We specifically mentioned on our charter a focus on two human rights, the right to freedom of expression and the right to freedom of assembly and association. We also want to propose guidelines. That's a goal that has been here longer than I've been here. So propose guidelines to protect the Internet as a human rights enabling environment in protocol development. We've been inspired by the work of the Privacy Considerations, or the Privacy Considerations Directorate, I guess. Although we don't have a directorate, we don't plan to have one for human rights work, but it was an inspiration. So, and then lastly, we just want to increase awareness both ways. So, talking more about human rights in the technical community and being able then to make the connections and relevant technical developments in the human rights community so that there's actually a dialogue there. So far, well, these are the planned outputs. We want to work on Internet drafts, but that's not all we want to do. We want to do policy and academic papers. Aubrey has talked about that in the past. I'd love for that to be on AOB this session or any in the future. In the past, there's been film and textual interviews, and also maybe at some point in AOB in this meeting or another one, we can talk about data analysis and visualization of the current RFCs, also discussion on the list, that sort of thing, and what we can glean from that. And then lastly, and this relates to a bit of the work on the guidelines draft that we'll be discussing later, we do from time to time protocol analysis to assess impact on human rights. So specifically, we've already talked about the charter, so that happened. That film was screened, and then also we've got an RFC 8280 that was published. So that's our sort of timeline history. But bringing us up to date, we have 2 active drafts. In the past, we've had lots of others. Some have expired, including draft politics. But I kept it on here, or draft political. I kept it on here because it might be relevant. It's only recently expired, and it might be relevant after Kim's talk to talk about reviving that a bit and how we might do so. But the main drafts we've got, which we will talk about today in the second half of the meeting, are freedom of association, which has some nice update to it, and guidelines for human rights protocol considerations. So that's it. That is the welcome. I hope everything is going well. I do thank you, Aubrey, always so good at this, stopping me from just rolling right ahead. We need to pause because we need a note taker. I believe the notes are very handily linked from the agenda. So if we could get somebody in the chat to just signal that they're taking notes, I think we'll all feel better about that, and we can move on with Kim's talk. Any volunteers for note taking? Well, since it's a talk that's for the next 30 minutes, I'll ask again after Kim is done if we can take some notes on the discussion.
I'm very good at doing it, but I will take some, but I would really appreciate if there would be others in the notepad taking them. So please, join me there.
Thank you. Yes, please join Aubrey. You don't have to take notes on the next part necessarily because it's a talk and there are slides, but when we have discussion, especially over our drafts, we'll need note takers. So chill for the next 30 minutes, but then please step up. So Kim, I will invite you to come on. You can click the microphone button to unmute your audio. Maybe we should check that first. And then you can even unmute your video if you'd like to have, I guess, a, what do you call that? Like a thumbnail video next to your slides, and then I'll be sharing your slides for you. Brilliant. I can see you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Can hear you perfectly. Welcome. Let me get your slides up.
Thank you.
You should see these, and you can tell me when you'd like me to hit the next slide.
Now, this is going to be interesting because I often jump back and forth, so I've never had someone control my slides, so just be patient.
Do you want to try to do it? If you
No,
can,
no, no.
This
System is way too complex for 12 a.m., so I'm good.
Right on. I need to try again because I had the wrong thing going on. Give me 2 seconds. All right, that should be showing now.
Do I just start?
Yeah, you can just go. I'm ready when you are.
All right. Hello, everyone. After talking to Mallory, we had a brief conversation. It was just a passing statement, and she mentioned the internet and how people who are working on the internet don't believe it's political. And I want to challenge that, particularly it's easy to be apolitical when you're the default. Next. I am Kim Creighton. My pronouns are she, her, and that's my Twitter handle as well as my website. Next. I'm an educator, so I always start with defining terms. So we'll get started. Next. I start every talk I do with these terms because they, as an educator, I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page and we have the same understanding before we move forward. So in this, when I'm using these words, this is what I mean. Privilege is simply about access. And I use this picture because I don't know how many people have seen these monkeys that are in the warm springs that are in Japan. And when you see them in National Geographic or whatever nature show. It just, they seem very harmonious and just, oh, people like, that's cute. Well, actually what it is there's a matriarchal family that gets to be in the hot springs, and all the other monkeys are trying to jockey for attention or mating rights just to get in the hot springs. So privilege is simply about access. Who can use, who can gain, who can be a part of. Next. Underrepresented is simply about numbers. You see a picture with several men and one woman. She is underrepresented. Next. Marginalized is about groups of people. And how groups of people are treated. So it's not about individuals. It is about groups of people. So in tech, although white women are underrepresented, unless they are intersect at unless they have another intersecting LGBTQ, if they're disabled from a community of color, they're usually not marginalized. Next. Diversity is simply about variety, and I use this and I know this is an international meeting, so I try to use very generic examples. So you see here, there are cans of paint, various cans of paint. That's what diversity is. So if I'm only given I'm told to paint a picture and I only have 4 colors, that picture is going to look, and because I really can't paint, that's going to be a very simple, ugly picture. But if I've given 20, 30, 60 different colors, it may still be an ugly picture, but I can create some colors that I could never create by myself by mixing colors together, or all kinds of things. So that's what that is. Diversity is simply about variety. Next. Inclusion is about experience. And you don't get to tell someone if they're included. They tell you based on how they experience your community, your organization, your event. Do they feel included? Next. Inclusion is not about equality. We in tech like to have this false narrative that everything is equal. When some people come in, we know that people who enter spaces at different levels. As a Black woman, I do not have the same power and privileges as a white man in tech. So to give me something that's equal does not help with my lived experience, does not help with my inclusion. Next. It is not about quotas. It's not about saying we need 10 people of color. We need somebody who's on the autism spectrum. We need somebody who has who's deaf. We need several LGBTQA people. It's not about quotas. Next. I just want you to reiterate, it is about lived experience. Next. So everything I do, every decision I make, I look at it through the lens of the guiding principles, and they start from the top down. Tech is not neutral, nor is it apolitical. You have to understand this fundamentally before you can get to the other guiding principles. Once you understand that tech is not neutral, nor is it apolitical, then you start to understand that intention is without strategy is chaos. There's so often that we have these intentions to do things, and then the impact of our intention has caused harm, and that was not our intention, but the impact matters, and without strategy, it causes chaos. Lack of inclusion is a risk management and increasingly a crisis management issue. We see often how someone or some companies' behavior has caused a lack of inclusion behavior has caused a risk management or crisis management issue. And once you fundamentally understand those, you understand why it is important to prioritize the most vulnerable. Next. For this talk, we're going to focus on the tech is not neutral, nor is it apolitical. Next. So this definition of political is one of the is problematic for me. It's it's on the surface, it seems innocent enough, but it's very binary because it speaks only to government and public affairs and countries. And it uses politics, in the word politics in its definition. And when people think of, when you use this definition, you only think of like political parties or how you fall within political governmental sphere. And I am working on a redefining a definition of political. And so far, what I have is any belief, decision, or action with the potential to influence systems, institutions, and policies, because those systems, institutions, and policies impact people's lives. This is one of is a very binary. The definition of political that is on the screen is a very binary. Extracts the human out of it. And we have to understand that our beliefs, decisions, and actions, if they have the potential to influence systems, institutions, and policies, are indeed political. Next. So I was watching a new documentary that's out called Coded Bias. And I saw this image, and because after talking to Mallory, I was like, where am I going to go with this talk? And then I just saw this image and I was like, oh, I think I know where I'm going to go with this talk, because this is where at the same time that the internet was being thought about and developed. So I need you to look at this picture and we'll come back to it later, or a concept of it later. So next. And the person who Meredith was talking about this picture in the movie Coded Bias, and she says, our ideas about technology and society that we think are normal are actually ideas that come from a very small and homogeneous group of people. And I really want you to understand that, because that is political. Next. And when I was watching this documentary, reminded me that I had taken this Coursera course. And if you don't know what Coursera is, it is an open source, open learning platform with a lot of free classes. And that's where I was taking, when I first entered tech, was taking a lot of my technology classes. And I remember taking this course by Dr. Charles Severinsen, who is at the University of Michigan. And that just clicked for me. And I was like, oh, let me see what's in this. And so what you'll see next is a few slides from this class, from this course. Next. So for me, history matters. And so that's why I wanted to walk through this class. So Alan Turing and Bletchley Park, when you're talking about the development of the internet with code breakers and people who worked in World War II. Next. And so after post-World War II, you have alumni from the US and the UK, code breakers working on these various computer processes. Either it was hardware, software, building the internet, or whatever. Next. And so you have this reliance on math and science, broad-based investment in maintaining U.S. and the West intellectual lead. Now, I want you to remember this intellectual lead. And then you have these mathematicians that were recruited, they're valued, recruited, brilliant, arrogant, and quirky. And then they talk about the beautiful mind. Next. And so Nash is like, this quintessential tech god, and he's the story behind, he's the person behind the story of Beautiful Mind. Next. And so in this diagram, it is the architects or the authors of the ARPANET completion report. Next. And then you have the NCSA, and you have Larry Schmier, who was pivotal in bringing a supercomputer to Urbana University. Next. And then you have the NSF-NET at the University of Michigan, and they were the networking part of the supercomputer. They didn't get a supercomputer, so they wanted to be the networking part of the internet. Next. And then you have this individual, Leonard, and he was the first person to do 2 packets on the internet. Next. And then you have Robert, and he was a co-inventor of the web. And so I stopped grabbing images from this this course for a reason. Next. Next. Because I wanted to talk about what is the default, because what were the default of early technologists? Next. They were white, cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied, Western, Christian, English-speaking, educated, fathers, married. It was male, white male focused. It was patriarchal, and it was binary thinking. And then there were other, but those were the main that you saw in those pictures. I would say that the majority of those individuals, including that image of the AI team, fall in this category. And next. And people might say, why is this important? Because the closer an individual is to the default, the greater their access to privilege, their ability to determine and to set the status quo, their chances of being extended the benefit of the doubt, their feelings are prioritized, the impact of their behavior is evaluated from the assumption of positive intent, and the expectation of being treated with compassion and empathy. Next. The furthest an individual is from the default, the greater their level of vulnerability related to the decisions and behaviors of others. And that's why I wanted to, I want to define what political is, because it's not just the government. And then the instances of being impacted by unintended harm, the chances of never being extended the benefit of the doubt, their thoughts, feelings, and perspectives are minimized or dismissed. The impact of their words and behaviors will be evaluated from the assumption of negative intent perspective, and the expectation of extending compassion and empathy to others, even those who've caused them harm. Next. Whiteness is political. And I don't care where you are in this world right now, you can turn on any news show and you can see that. Whiteness is political. Next. So why does understanding this matter? Next. Because systems, institutions, and policies are developed to reinforce the default. And I want to bring in, before I move forward, I took based on the intro that, not even the intro, Mallory was going through, like your core values was internet as a human right. To have that as a core value is political. And then you had a networking and standards and politics that was, I guess, that has expired. That is political. Those are systems, institutions, and policies that are developed. And we have to be mindful that those are developed to reinforce the default. Next. So I wanted to give you an example, because some of you may not understand why I'm saying what I'm saying, because if you have an idea that the internet is is neutral or is apolitical. This is why I want you to understand, and this is why I love history, is because what I showed you previously were white men. When I showed you, when you saw the slide of the default, it was for white men. And so people, the narrative is always what other people weren't there, or they're absent. And we see it in our organizations now. People still make these same excuses for why there aren't brown and black people in these spaces, why there aren't indigenous people in these spaces. And without a historical perspective, you just think they weren't there because they weren't interested. They had other things to do. They weren't good enough. That's usually one of the things that leads to them when we go back to the definitions of what marginalization is. It goes back to that marginalization. Oh, they're just not good enough. But when you particularly, and this is why I took this route, because particularly the individuals that developed the internet were in the U.S. And right after World War II. And we had something in place called the GI Bill right after World War II. And as you will see, it is political, and it ensured, all but ensured, that only people who were available to develop the internet were white people. So the GI Bill was to help qualifying veterans and their families get money to go to get costs for schools and trainings. Next. But there's been some things that people don't talk about the GI Bill. How the GI Bill's promise was denied to millions of Black World War II veterans. Next. And it was denied in many spaces, but we're going to specifically talk about it was denied in housing. It was denied in the wealth accumulation, but specifically we're going to talk about here education. Black veterans in search of education, they have been guaranteed fair no better. Many Black men returning home from war didn't even try to take advantage of the bill's educational benefits. They could not afford to spend time in school instead of working, but those who did were at a considerable disadvantage compared to their white counterparts. Public education provided poor preparation for Black students, and many lacked much educational attainment at all due to poverty and social pressures. This is political. So when we talk about who got to decide who built the internet, when these soldiers came back, because, and I'm talking about this specifically because those individuals who left Bletchley Park, who were at MIT, who were at all these great illustrious universities, they had a different, first of all, they had and this is why equality, we have to be mindful of equality, and we're looking for equity. We're not looking for equality, because in this very paragraph, it says that Black students, because of the lack of education, because of the communities that they came from, they weren't even educated. Many weren't ready to, weren't at that college level. They just weren't there. Next. As veterans applications flooded universities, Black students often found themselves left out. Northern universities dragged their feet when it came to admitting Black students, and Southern colleges barred Black students entirely. And the VA itself encouraged Black veterans to apply for vocational training instead of university admission, arbitrarily denied educational benefits to these students. So again, I'm trying to show you a through line of why there were only white people, white males, because you can't even say white women, white males in these universities who were getting to make the decisions on the internet. Even the VA was discouraging Black men from going to universities and pushing them into vocational training. Next. Those students who did attend college found doors closed at every turn. A full 85% of Black veterans were shunted off to Black colleges, institutions that were underfunded and overwhelmed by the influx of new students. Most were unaccredited, and with a massive influx of applications, they had to turn away tens of thousands of veterans. So first of all, I want to make sure that I am clear. There was absolutely nothing wrong with Black colleges and universities, except for in the United States, we had a thing of separate but equal, and these things were not actually equal. The universities, white universities, had far more resources and facilities and qualified educators than Black universities. Next. Though Congress granted all soldiers the same benefits theoretically, the segregationist principles of almost every institution of higher learning effectively disbarred a huge proportion of Black veterans from earning college degrees. So this is why I love history, because people, again, have these binary. They weren't there because they made choices not to be there. They weren't there because they weren't good enough. There were systems, institutions, and policies in place that kept Blacks out of the university system. Next. So, next. Who got to build the internet was political. Next. And since whiteness is still the default throughout the technology ecosystem, the internet is still political. Next. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Thanks so much. So typically we have discussion Q&A after presentations. We're not going to do that today, but there may be an opportunity to take the lessons, the discussion I think that Kim has raised and started, and feed it into a conversation about potentially draft political that is still, a research group draft, but we're going to put that all the way towards the end. I just want to, before Kim leaves, just really thank her. Thank you for coming, Kim. It's been really great to have you engage in our space. I hope we get to have more of your engagement in the future. So we'll definitely keep in touch. And yeah, thanks again. I found this to be really, really helpful, and I hope other people did too. So with that, we're just going to take a pause. I need to flip slides. That's the main reason we're pausing. And I think we're going to go straight on in to draft association. So if I could just one more time. Oh, right, Jonathan. Sorry. Thanks, Jonathan, for volunteering to do notes. If others could also help Jonathan and Aubrey, I know that they would appreciate that. Draft association, brilliant. All right. We should all be on the same page. Cool. Very good. Good. Yeah, thanks for everyone also encouraging Kim and thanking her for coming to the talk. I think she's still around. She'll see those messages. Anyway, moving into draft association, you've probably all read the draft. It's just been updated recently. Niels is the other co-author that's in the meeting. I don't believe Stefan or Gisela are, but if they are, feel free to turn your mic on and jump in and correct me if I make mistakes in this presentation. But it's quite simple. We have updated it just as we said we would at the last Hrpc meeting, IETF 108. Great. But for those who weren't at that meeting, I will just go ahead and go over the draft itself and talk about where it's come from and where we're headed. So it's like I said in the welcome introduction, the Hrpc was chartered to focus on human rights and protocol considerations, but two specific human rights, namely freedom of expression and freedom of association and assembly. So this draft is a specific it was part of the specific roadmap for this research group. Niels and Gisela de Acha were the first authors. They gave us a completed draft, actually, from beginning to end, well-researched and everything. But there were some changes that were needed, so we asked for some additional editors along the way. So Joe Hall at some point was an editor. Stefan Couture from University of Montreal also was an editor up until very recently. And in that period of just sort of revising the draft, we actually held 3 interims just to talk about this draft. It was mostly around redoing a literature review. And then at the end, the conclusion of that literature review, Stefan moved on as editor, and then, but not before identifying a handful of sub-questions. The sub-questions, we stopped there, and we thought we needed to really answer the sub-questions with case studies from IETF protocols. And so Niels and I have done that since then. Right. So we've also changed the research question a few times. Actually, Niels, could you help me out by reading the actual research question? Because I think it changed again. I apologize. I can't hear your audio yet, but this is me putting you on the spot, so. You're on mute. At least I can't hear you. Oh, right, of course. Go ahead. Okay, hold on.
Unmute
Niels, do you have
audio.
audio? There you are.
Sorry about that. Sorry.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, putting me on the spot, no problem whatsoever. The research question was, what are the considerations of the right of freedom of assembly and association for protocol development? And that has now changed into what are the protocol development considerations for freedom of assembly and association? So we made it tighter to stick more closely to the charter of the research group, and we also tried to make the draft more tighter to answer the question. So where the research was first aimed at trying to establish more relations in a similar manner to RFC 8280, we now tried to narrow it down and make it tighter, also based on the structure proposed by the literature review. And now we try to answer the questions in a more structural way, which would then also allow us to better answer the research questions and the sub-research questions. So now
Great.
back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So yes, and originally as well, the draft did not plan on offering overall conclusions. As far as I understood, we wanted to keep those in sort of guidelines and out of this draft. But because it appears to be a full, piece of research with a literature review, sub-questions, case studies, etc., it may also make sense for us to finish this draft by giving some conclusions. So that's, a TBD on that. But let's go into it first. So here's where we landed with the literature review. Here are some highlights. I actually really don't want to go over them, but you can check out the slides if you want to see what we found to be interesting. And obviously it's all in the draft. But to say that it was worth going back and looking at the literature review. I've also had an offer from folks who work in the just for a human rights organization to help strengthen some of the footnotes we have. So not to really change the substance of what we've said, but to maybe just make some of our pointers a bit better. So we'll follow up with that in the future. These were the sub-questions that came out of the literature review. So things that were very clear, some of it was on the established side of like, this is the nuance behind freedom of association and assembly. Some of it was behind, here's what happens when you slap the internet on top of a society doing its best to adhere to human rights and the things that fall out of it. So these were not necessarily research gaps. They were genuinely things that we felt we wanted to be more curious about. And so in an attempt to keep moving the research forward, we elaborated on these questions. And at the last meeting at 1:08, we presented these questions, and we more or less, as far as we can tell, had consensus that these were the right questions to ask. No changes to them, no additions, no subtractions. So go ahead and try to answer them. And that was then the sort of mandate that Niels and I worked on. So we did that in section 6. We're calling it cases and examples because it's not like a case study in which you would take one thing and start from the beginning and go all the way to the end. And, it's not like that, actually. It winds up using a couple different, in most cases, kinds of technologies, protocols that have been standardized in the IETF to talk about a few different themes that then answer in aggregate the questions above. So it's not a perfect one-to-one. It's not always what we had expected we would do, but I think it's quite interesting, right? So this is the outline of the 6th section. So first we talk about the peace versus peaceful versus unpeaceful, or non-peaceful, as it's laid out in freedom of association and assembly. It's an important element there. Can we distinguish network traffic as, in its characteristics of being peaceful or unpeaceful? Spam and DDoS. So also on agency, so another really important part of freedom of association and assembly is the question of agency. Does a member of this assembly or this association have agency to leave and to join, etc. So we looked at mailing lists and spam to talk about those things. And then generally speaking, there's just a lot in, as you can imagine, freedom of association and civic space. So the ways in which, assembly and public space are used to, to enact one's civic duty and to be civic members of society, et cetera, whatever. So yeah, we found that the interesting cases there and examples could come from email mailing lists, IRC, WebRTC, and peer-to-peer networking. So those sort of fall in that last bucket. And that one thing that sort of joins them all together is that they're, really communications that are happening between people with agency. So that's it. We really encourage you to read that section thoroughly. I think it could benefit from additions and corrections if the analysis is off based on people who are familiar with it. I would love a bit more technical specificity in all of those, but I mean, I think at some point it just needs to be swept and edited. We can take pull requests in GitHub, of course, for any of that stuff. But moving forward, thinking about where this might go, and then I'll be done talking, and I want Niels to come in and offer anything else that any corrections to what I've said. We're thinking that we might actually want to do a conclusion section. So to not to add more case studies, although we could still continue to do that. It just seems like there's some interesting things that we could maybe pull out. But to be completely honest with you all, I haven't done that yet. So, spent time writing out section 6, but I have not yet, for me, it would be printing it out on a piece of paper, going through it with a red pen and actually trying to find some of these conclusions and pulling them out and making a case for some of these things. So if we feel like that's an okay mandate for the draft to have, we can go ahead and do that. Or, I mean, I wouldn't say I would actually welcome anyone in the group, because this is a research group draft, to step up and offer to do that. So yeah, here are the things that maybe need to be done. in this meeting. But yeah, actually, before I do that, I just wanted to make sure that I was correct in the things that I've said, and give Niels a chance to chime in with anything he wants to elaborate on previously. I can also move back a slide or two if you need me to.
No, thanks so much, Mallory, for this excellent overview. I already saw a question in the chat about the interrelation with other rights, and this is something we also reiterated in the draft, that all rights are interrelated, inextricable, and interdependent. So we also talk about privacy in this draft, but the vantage point is also of course the right of association and assembly. So what we've been doing is really build the draft up from the ground on up, because we've been working on this in this group for quite a bit, and I think we made great progress. But I'm really curious to hear from you all. And if you think that the structure has improved, so in the previous session, every week we adopted the literature review. So if we can adopt the analysis this time, we can work on putting the crown on top of the work and rework the conclusions for next time. And then hope we got a draft that is almost good to go. So I'm very curious to hear from the people what you think about it.
Perfect, exactly, yeah.
I can give Benjamin the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Benjamin, I'll give you the microphone.
Sorry, Aubrey, I didn't hear what you said. Was it?
I think you need to unmute yourself as well.
Hi, this is Ben Schwartz. I'm not sure if it's my turn yet, but I thought maybe Aubrey said it was.
Yeah, go for it.
I'll just say, I think this is great work. I think this is an important area. I think that the idea of trying to determine how to design protocols to respect and support freedom of assembly sounds very challenging. At least, in my simple interpretation, where that implies essentially a forward-oriented logic, where we attempt to predict the effects that our protocols will have on the world. I think that kind of prediction is very difficult, and coming up with principles for that prediction sounds even harder. So I would, in the course of conclusions that you're drawing, I would be really interested if we could see conclusions that are a little bit more reactive. If we see a protocol and it is having a certain kind of impact, how can we react to that and maybe make changes or updates that improve things? Thanks.
Thanks for that, Ben. Yeah, I think that would be really good to capture in the notes, just so that when we're typing away at the conclusions later, we don't accidentally say things that are going to be impossible to achieve. But yeah, I think that's a fair point. That, I mean, it's not necessarily so much about predicting or designing around it as it is, for me anyway, just having the genuine curiosity of what are some of the aspects and characteristics of these technologies that have either enabled or been an issue for when considering freedom of association. So I don't think they will be prescriptive conclusions. I think that would probably not work anyway. Anyone else?
That's in the queue. I'll jump in a second with a few comments, if I can. This is Aubrey. I'm really quite impressed with the direction this is taking, and the way it read, and I just reread it again before the meeting, and while it's still moving along, I can see the things that you want to add, but I think it's really coming very close to a point where we have, what looks to me like a well-balanced document that's going into the issues. And while there's a little bit more of the end in terms of, okay, so now what, or how do we look at it? I'm actually quite impressed with the way it's going, and I just wanted to mention that while we were talking about this. Thanks. I do have some smaller points at places, but mostly the issues I found were more editorial and evenness of language and things like that through the document. But nothing jumped out at me as being necessarily problematic or sort of going in a problematic direction. So thanks very much to all of you for all you've done on it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for the encouragement, Aubrey. I think I'm really pleased with it as well. And so thanks to everybody who stuck with it this whole time. I think it's made it a better piece. So I think there's somebody, so I'm looking at the chat. The protocol was asked, what's for asking questions? You can just go ahead and turn your mic on, as far as I can tell. And we can turn it off. That seems to be about it.
Hands up to speak, but then no one. Oh.
Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, and then so I don't know if I should read this question out or if CH would like to actually ask it directly. But it says, I think the association draft would benefit from a discussion of resource and performance. For example, many services use big and costly servers to replicate messages to multiple people. Replication can also happen in peer-to-peer network, but it is limited by resource, bandwidth of user connection, power of user computers, even time availability. I like that. So yeah, I'd love if CH wants to hop in. That's a good question, or it's a good addition as well, something to think about.
Mallory, this is Christian Wittema. That was my question.
Ah, brilliant. Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's something that we found a lot actually during the evolution of video conferencing networks and systems. It's that it's doable, but very hard to do this kind of stuff peer-to-peer, because effectively you're dealing with a limited resource, and it's much easier to consume what's coming from a server than to try to build a server for multiple people from your home connection on your home computer or your phone connection on your phone. There are issues there, and the fact is that the more you go to the least resistance point, the more you go towards server-based systems that are inherently under the control of whoever is putting up the servers. And that's clear attention there. If you want to do that in peer-to-peer, you need to engineer your system. You need, in fact, you probably need to catch up a lot with the possible research and engineering to make that work. And we have not been doing that. And that might be something which is interesting to discuss.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Christian. I think that is really interesting. And it also then gets to some notion of access, which I think is mentioned. Certainly it's mentioned in the literature review. It'd be nice if we could elaborate that in the case studies, and maybe this is one way to do that. Access, meaning quality of access and things. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it might be interesting. So I'd be curious, Christian, do you think this should be under peer-to-peer and conferencing? Because I could also see how this would intersect with accessibility. So do you think like performance considerations and impact, should that be a separate heading, or you think it should be part of peer-to-peer of web conferencing or of something else? Because I also understood that processor cycles also were important vis-a-vis encryption and stuff. So would performance and considerations around that be a separate case? And if so, what would that case be, or should we integrate it further across the board?
I have to get used to that UI. Performance is mostly a problem in so much that it interacts with usability. For example, if you want to relay audio from peer to peer to peer to peer, you end up with huge latencies.
Mm-hmm.
And because you end up with these latencies, your system is much less usable than one that goes to a big server and back. And the same goes for video, for the frame rate of the video or the definition of the video and things like that. It also, the other aspect, which is also part of usability, part of performance, is the historic reason why we went away from peer-to-peer system as basically as an industry, which is effectively that in many cases, we are using now systems like phones that are on only a fraction of the time. And because they are on only a fraction of the time, it's not a good fit for something like a connection that has to be a peer-to-peer network that has to be up all the time and get synchronization and things like that. So that's probably something that needs some research, because I mean, it's hard. It has been tried and it has failed many times. So and the alternative, of course, is to have big servers and then depend on the goodwill of whoever is putting up those big servers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Jonathan, if you don't want to send audio, I can read your question out loud because it's pertinent to this particular discussion, and then we can go down the mic queue. But Jonathan says, is there a technical reason that peer-to-peer would be slower? It would seem that it should be possible to achieve lower latencies versus round trips to servers. That might be to you, Christian. I can't hear Christian. Yeah, I don't hear anything, Christian. Okay, but Chris Lemons replied, peer-to-peer often creates a many-to-many situation where the total number of connections and transmissions increases with the square of the participants in multi-participant communications. When a central server is involved, often only a single connection for each person into the server is required. It varies by the protocol, of course. I mean, I think in just maybe to answer your question, Niels, or to think more about your question and where to place it, I do think we need a way of talking about how the manner of assembly may be very much defined by the platform or the protocol being used. And that may be notable in the analysis across all of them. I mean, certainly in the last section. So that would be, let me get my slides back. So here, 6.3, it might actually be worth talking about the quality and nature of assembly that's possible and how it's defined by the protocol or the platform. And then that maybe would lead to an overall conclusion of some kind. But we first have to set it up in the analysis.
have 2 people in the queue.
Okay. Good. Infrastructure too, I like that. Okay, so yeah, folks in the queue, I'm not sure that I can moderate that. I'm like, I can only take people out of it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what we do, and I'm afraid to click on one and transfer them from the queue. I've not done this before.
I'm not sure I understood
Click on
that.
that and enable him to speak. I don't know if he can just unmute his microphone.
I can't do anything. Is Midoko, folks? I think if you've put your hand up and you're first in the queue, and it looks like Dan is the first in the queue, I think you should be able to just unmute yourself. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
It worked. Hey. So thank you, Niels. So I'm wondering, you know, I read your draft, and I'm wondering if there's any sort of prescriptive suggestions that you could make for protocol developers to help with association. I'm thinking, for instance, like, let's say an authenticated key exchange. It would seem to me that having the property of deniability would be useful to facilitate freedom of association. And so I'm wondering if you can create a section that has some prescriptive instructions for protocol developers in the IETF that we could, as we're developing a protocol, we can look back and say, you know, are we abiding by RFC XYZ section, you know, A.Z, something like that. I think that would make a resulting RFC be much more useful, and I would at least find value in that. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Mallory, will you answer this?
Yeah, I can. I mean, I think that we want to be helpful, and we want to come to conclusions that are useful, but I don't know that we can be prescriptive. I don't think that's actually our role. In the IRTF, I think that just getting to the point where we've, you know, made the connections, we've done analysis, and it seems rather comprehensive, and then we can pull out lessons learned. I think that's actually as far as we need to go. But, you know, I'd love for this to be referenced, you know, if it is, if there's someone out there developing a protocol that might benefit from, you know, referencing this association work, then that's great, but I don't think we can be prescriptive, actually. I'd be happy if somebody else had a different view, Aubrey or Niels or even Colin.
This is Aubrey. We certainly agree with you. We certainly can't be prescriptive, you know, and certainly can't be prescriptive about work being done in the IETF. You know, we can, you know, do things as we've done before, is, you know, the consideration type questions that one can ask themselves, and can even give indications of perspectives one can take. But yeah, being prescriptive, especially being prescriptive about work done in the IETF, would probably be going further than we should, unless someone does want to say otherwise. But I have the same impression as you. Thanks.
Yeah, perfect. And yeah, I heard that loud and clear, you know, and that is in our research group title. So you can offer up considerations. Cool. So Dan, I'm going to take you out of the queue, and Mike, you're up next. You can just go ahead and unmute yourself.
Can you hear me? Is my audio coming through?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Awesome, thank you. So I had a few thoughts here. One is that in response to this recent discussion, it seems like it may be useful to kind of spell out the different principles that are in tension, and kind of frame it as trade-offs that need to be made, not necessarily always in a protocol, although sometimes that will be the case, but also in implementation and adoption of those protocols. I think that there are a lot of like values and principles that are in conflict, and it's not easy to resolve that with a purely technical solution in terms of like a digital protocol definition that says this is how it must be done. And I think that part of the way that we get there is, I think it was Ben earlier who was suggesting that perhaps rather than being prescriptive, we have some more considerations to how to react to issues once they are seen. And so maybe that's the way of doing that is to think of it in terms of agency to react. In terms of, especially for things like the section on blocking together and like the IRC use case. I also think of like Mastodon and a federated model where you have control at different layers, and you can look at that in terms of agency. So I wonder if that might be one way that we can keep it at the level of considerations, rather than being really prescriptive, but also provide some useful bits and pieces that can be adopted.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. That's a good idea, is to hone in on tensions and trade-offs. I think that's a really good idea, just to make sure in each sort of case study we've done that and see if there are commonalities that can be even conclusions. I mean, it's also a very human rights thing as well to look at tensions and trade-offs. I mean, that is, there are tensions and trade-offs between, freedom of expression and privacy, for example, and other things like that. So it's definitely not unique to this area of inquiry. So I think it's good to get that in the notes as a way to check that we've done our due diligence in all these sections. I'm going to take you out of the queue. If nobody else is in the queue, so we actually may not use our whole 2 hours, but before we end this particular section, let me go back to my last slide, just to ask for folks who may have an interest in this to work with us, or if you've reviewed the draft, if you've read it. If you haven't, please do that, and then go ahead and send any pull requests or open issues in our GitHub for HRPC, which is linked from our data tracker page. That would be very helpful in getting this text shined up and ready for IETF 110, in which hopefully we will have like a fully completed, from introduction to conclusion and everything in between, draft done for you all for final discussion. What I'm not hearing, though, that there are any issues, really like big, large, outstanding ideological, thought-provoking issues with the section 6 on case studies and examples. So I'm really happy about that, and I think it means that we should go ahead and move forward with concluding this work. So wonderful. Final thoughts, Niels? Amazing. I knew I was going to get thumbs up. I'm so grateful for that. All right, good. So yeah, we have one other item on our agenda that was planned around draft guidelines, but I don't see Gershabad. Niels, do you feel like you can present a
Totally.
bit on draft guidelines? Okay, I don't know that there are slides for that, so I'm
There are
going to
no
stop sharing my
slides, but
screen.
I got everything here. So
I'm so impressed. Please take over. I'm going to unmute.
hi all. Thanks so much for all for being here and for having this discussion. I'm talking about the latest revision of draft guidelines. I put the link in the chat if you want to have a quick look, but of course you have all read them thoroughly. Just to refresh your mind, the objectives of draft guidelines is to create a document for human rights guidelines and considerations. It's practice-based and practice-oriented. So it takes off the findings that were found in RFC 8280. It might seek to update it because it has more experience and builds on that, on doing human rights reviews. We've done that on doing interviews, on doing reviews, etc. People were already pretty happy with the draft, but then there was one final discussion on attribution that we still needed to rework, and we have done that now. So in previous sessions, we've said, well, that is almost good for last call, and that is why Gershabad and I would like to bring forward and ask if you all think this is ready for last call, and hope we can continue with this document. So rather short and sweet. So the only changes that have been made was 2.3.3.20, which is a very much a, on the one hand, on the other hand, guidelines and consideration. But looking forward to discuss and hear what you all think. So thanks so much.
Niels, can you hear me? Mideko told me you can't. I think you can though. Okay, good. I just wondered from a meeting, sort of facilitation perspective, what would be useful for you in terms of feedback at this very moment, other than just sort of an open invitation to discuss? Like, do you feel like it needs?
Is it ready to go? That's the question.
Is it ready to go? Yeah.
Yeah. Because we had achieved it is ready to go, but then Gershabad said we should add that last point of the discussion because we reviewed, before we said it's ready to go, we reviewed the whole discussion on the list, which were many threads, and this was the only thread we hadn't covered. So now it's covered, so we feel that we've answered and covered pretty much everything that was covered in HRPC discussions and stuff that came up in the interviews and during the experience of doing human rights reviews. So this should be a practical document for people who want to do human rights reviews of their own drafts or the drafts of others. Yeah. And it's been, because like the very first version has been out for quite some time, since 2017. It's been put to use, I know, in practical ways by various folks. And yeah, and it's on its 6th version. So, I mean, I can't imagine it being more ready to go. That's where I'm stuck. So by that token, I think it is ready to go, but I'm happy to hear from my co-chair, others. All right. So Aubrey's saying she thinks it's ready for last call, which is great. So we should do that on the list. But do others have a response to that as well? Open question. Fantastic. Hey, Niels, can you stop typing for a sec? Sorry,
I think it's
Aubrey.
ready, unless there's someone that says, no, hold on,
Right.
here's this problem. But not hearing that through my reading, I thought, yes, it was ready, and certainly need to do it on put out an announcement on the list and do it timed and do the whole thing proper like. But yeah, I'm quite impressed with the way it's gone so far. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's really good effort by Gershavat and Niels. So, all right, so we'll take that to the list. We don't have, I think, anything left to discuss. I'm going to just quickly share my agenda again. Yep, right. So we did have time to talk about, we have any other business. I mentioned that we might we could talk about reviving draft political after Kim's speech. We could, if there are other things to follow up with respect to publishing documents in other journals or other mediums, that's been another order of any other business. But yeah, it's actually kind of an open mic, and we can leave it open for the next 5 minutes or so and then close it out if there's no comments.
Mallory?
Go for it.
Yeah, so if other people, so after last call of draft guidelines, I'm happy to revive draft political and integrate stuff, but also I'm very much looking forward to co-author it with people. So if other people are interested in either adding points, feel free to shoot them to the list, add them to the GitHub repo, or email them directly to me. And then we can get that item that was still on the back burner going again.
Can I ask you, so this is maybe future work for you, but it could also be picked up at any time. Can you just give, for folks who aren't familiar with it, can you just give the broad overview of what draft political is all about, what it's trying to achieve, its research objective?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mallory. Of course.
Extremely brief. No, I'm just kidding.
What the draft political is trying to do is trying to analyze what are all the different aspects of standard setting in the IETF, and so of protocols and standards, and the process of protocol and standards making, and thereby to understand how power and politics play a role in both the process and the outputs of these documents, of these processes.
Awesome.
So it is a similar multiple case study design, similar to the to draft political, to a draft association, but as draft association, draft political needs to be cleaned up again. So, but maybe we could now we have more issues and more things. We could first do a more is more parts, and then restructure it, clean it up, and continue with that as well. So that seemed to work really well for draft association. So maybe we should go for a similar mode for draft political.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that working really well. Like the formula for draft association seemed to work really well once we hit it. The only thing that I would say is a potentially slight drawback is that while freedom of association and assembly are incredibly well defined because they're in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, political and the nature of what it means to be political is a little bit more nebulous. But I think what we can do there is what I think you have done already, and what many scholars in this field would do, which is to really lean on the existing writing about it. And there's no shortage of scholarly research that makes the case for this. And what political means may be part of that discovery, trying to explain it and talk about what political means in this context in a clear way for people reading it might actually be very helpful.
Yeah, and I do hope that it could then also contribute to other discussions that we've seen popping up vis-a-vis consolidation, etc. So it would, I think it could contribute and mix into separate discussions. So yeah, looking forward to that work.
If we can add that as an explicit goal of this research in some way, that we want to actually unpack what it means to be political, I think that would really help people care about this draft more, frankly.
Yeah, those are all great things that I hope make it into the notes. And then once we're done with last call of draft guidelines, get right on it.
Cool. Aubrey, you were sort of in and out of unmuting yourself. Did you want to jump in on draft political? No, I can't hear you though. Is it just me?
Can I be heard now?
Yeah.
No, I lost audio.
Still there? Okay. So Aubrey's comment being the draft political can look more in the civil and political rights aspect. Yeah, I think that's fair. For sure. I think just even the basics of one slide that I remember Kim had in her talk in the beginning of it was just it is political and it's not neutral, and those are actually two different things. And I think sometimes draft political was just trying to make the case that things were not neutral, but then taking a step further to talk about the actual positive expression of civil and political rights.
Yeah, I also really enjoyed the finding that Kim brought really clearly to light, that equality and equity are not the same things, and I think it would be really interesting to bring that forward and research that deeper in this context.
I like that too. I think that's a really good idea. I'm pausing for anyone who wants to jump in the queue on any of these issues. We'd love to hear feedback. We can also take it to the list and would appreciate your feedback there as well on all these things. And again, feel free to jump in on this in GitHub, where we take issues and pull requests. And I think because we weren't able to, it was just a bit of an awkward time zone for a lot of our speakers, and we weren't able to get a second speaker as we'd hoped, so we're just about 30 minutes early. And I'm sure no one would complain. I'm not going to complain. It is Sunday night for me still. Okay, great. David, Lawrence, please go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
I just had a quick question about whether we were supposed to blue sheet for this meeting or not in the Cody or what have you.
Can I ask for help on that one? Because I'm not actually sure how blue sheets are being handled at 109, if it changed over since 108. Colin, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, the blue sheet's being auto-generated.
That's what I thought. Okay. So yeah, if you're logged in with Data Tracker, it's auto-generated. If you're coming in on Jabber, I think that is not, I don't know how that works. I think we're good then. Anything else? Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to Kim Creighton for the speech. Thanks to Niels and Gershabad for the work on the drafts, and for everybody for coming. I really appreciate the attendance we had for this awkward time zone and the first session of 109. Yeah. Welcome to 109. Welcome to Bangkok.
Thanks so much for chairing, Avery and Mallory, and thanks for co-authoring Draft Association as well, and for presenting. Have a great day, evening, night, week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
See you around.